Daf Lamed Ches, the Mishnah begins on Lamed Zayin Amid Beis, the last two lines on the Daf. Now, at the beginning of this parak, the seventh parak, we had a list of those recitations that require Lashon Kodesh, and amongst them we had Birchas Kohanim. Now the Mishnah wants to explain the dinim of Birchas Kohanim and the difference between Birchas Kohanim in the Mikdash and Birchas Kohanim in Gvulin outside the Mikdash. Birchas Kohanim Ketzad. Birchas Kohanim, which we said requires Lashon Kodesh. Bamedina, outside of the Beis HaMikdash, otherwise known as Gvulin, Omer Osa Shalosh brachos. He has to recite 3 brachos, which means that he separates from one bracha to the other and gives an opportunity to the tzibur to recite Amen. But Mikdash bracha achas. In the Mikdash, the Kohen will recite all 3 psukim and all 3 brachos without any hefsek between one and the other, because there's no din of aniyas Amen on the Birchas Kohanim in the Mikdash, as the Gemara will explain. Furthermore, there's another distinction between Birchas Kohanim in the Mikdash and outside the Mikdash. For Mikdash, Omer Hashem, in the Mikdash, in 3 psukim, the name of Hashem is mentioned, and he will read the Shem Kiksavo, which means the Shem Havai Yud Kei Vav Kei. Medina b'kinuyav, but in Medina he reads it as ad nus, ado, and then noi, and that's because the Gemara is going to darshan that there's a general halacha that in tfilos and in brachos we don't recite the name kiksavo yud kei vav kei, and the only exception to that rule is in the Beis HaMikdash. Now, another distinction between Birchas Kohanim inside the Mikdash and outside the Mikdash. And that has to do with the way the hands are lifted by the Kohen. The Medina, outside the Beis HaMikdash, Kohanim nosim es yedeim keneged kisveihem, which means that they should not lift up their hands too high, but rather it should be at the level of their shoulders. The Bamigdash al gabi roshehem. In the Beis HaMikdash, where the Shema Meforash Yud Kei Vav Kei is enunciated, and the Shechina is Shruya al Etzboseim, therefore they should lift up their hands above their heads as an act of kavod l'Shechina. That's how we give reverence to the Shechina. And in the Beis HaMikdash, the Shechina is there and it resides or rests on the fingers of the Kohen. Chutz mi Kohen Gadol, she eino magbias yadav l'mala min hatzitz. The Kohen Gadol has another issue when he recites Birchas Kohanim in the Beis HaMikdash. He's not meant to raise his arms above his forehead because he's wearing a tzitz on his forehead, and engraved in the tzitz is the Shem HaMeforash. And therefore it's not appropriate to raise his hands above the tzitz. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Af Kohen Gadol Magbi Yodav L'Mala Min HaTzitz. Rabbi Yehuda recognizes that the tzitz has the Shem HaMeforash engraved on it, but yet there still is a factor here that trumps the L'Mala Min HaTzitz, and that's the Kavod HaShechina. So even though there's a sort of a conflict here, a tug of war pulling in 2 different directions, there's kavod of the shame that's written on the tzitz, and there's the kavod of the Shechina that's shora al etzbos yadav. And Rabbi Yehuda is going to derive from a pasuk that Kavod HaShechina trumps the Kavod of the Shem Shekosv al Hatzitz. Where does he see this? Shenemar, he sees in the pasuk, this is in the 9th chapter of Vayikra, it says, Vayisa Aaron es yadav el ha'am vayivarchem. And Aaron lifted his arms and he blessed the people. Now, what proof does Rabbi Yehuda invoke from the pasuk? It doesn't say that he lifted his arms above his head. And Rabbi Yehuda's matir lifting his arms above the tzitz because of the Shechina. So the Tosas Yontif gives the following answer. He says that the Mishnah is not really quoting this pasuk as a proof to Rabbi Yehuda, but rather this is the end of the Mishnah. It's the closing point in the Mishnah, that from this pasuk we're going to derive dinim of Nesias Kapayim in general. And we'll see exactly what dinim we can derive from this pasuk. Now we're up to the Gemara. Tonu Rabbanan, here on Daf Lamed Ches Amud Aleph. In the Parsha, in Noso of Birchas Kohanim, the pasuk says, Kos Sevarchu. And the Ko is indicative of B'lashon HaKodesh. And this we saw also back at the beginning of this Mishnah, in the case of a Chalitza, that we derive Chalitza from the word Ko. Okay, so now we have the Gemara here with the Tanu Rabbanon, and the word Ko Sevarchu teaches me that the Birchas Kohanim has to be recited in Hebrew, in Lashon Kodesh. Ata Omer b'Lashon Kodesh o Eino Ela b'Chol Lashon. You might entertain the idea, says the Brisa, that you can read the brachos in any language. It doesn't have to be in Lashon Kodesh. And the answer is Nemar Kan. In Birchas Kohanim it says Ko Sevarchu. The Nemar Lahalon. So this is the parsha in Dvarim Chav Zayin of Har Grizim and Har Evel. When they crossed the Yarden, the Shvatim were divided into two. Right, 6 Shvatim on Har Grizim, 6 on Har Evel, and the Levium in the middle would recite the brachos and the klolos. And there it says, Eile Yamdu Levarich Es Ha'am. And the word here, I think the key word is Levarich. And this becomes, meaning the Levium, the paradigm of bracha. Malahalon b'Lashon Kodesh, and the Gemara earlier in this parak had derived from Sukkim that the Levium recited the brachas in Lashon Kodesh. Afkan Birchas Kohanim is also b'Lashon Kodesh. Fine, Tosas here asks a different kind of kasha. Why don't we derive from Birchas Hamazon? Birkas HaMazon likewise says Uberachta and requires and does not require Lashon Kodesh, so it would pull us in the opposite direction towards the conclusion that the brachas could be recited in any language. And Tosas answers that it's more logical to compare Birchas Kohanim to Birchas HaGrizim, because in both cases the nusach of the bracha is incorporated into the Torah itself. Whereas Birkas HaMazon, we don't have any nusach in the Torah. Rabbi Yehuda Omer ein tzarech. I have a different derivation or origin from which I derive the conclusion that Birchas Kohanim requires Lashon Kodesh. Harei Omer Ko Sivarchu. And the word Ko means that this is the way it has to be. It's like this, and it's critical. It must be like this. And it's got to be the Lashon Hazeh, the way the bracha is written in the Torah. And as we pointed out, there's something very similar going on with regard to Chalitza in the dialogue between the Choletz and the Choletzes, that there also it says Ko and Kacha and so forth and so on, and therefore it has to be B'Lashon Kodesh. Tanya Idach, we have another brayso, Ko Sivarchu B'Amida, that if the Kohanim are bestowing the bracha, they have to do so while they're standing. How do we know this? Maybe they could sit and give the bracha. Nemar kana berchas kohanim, it says kosev varchu. V'nemar lahalan in berchas har grizim and har evo. It says a lashon bracha. It says elu yamdu levarech, which means that the Levium stand and they deliver the bracha. Malahal, just like in berchas haLeviim bahar grizim ba'amida, so too afkan berchas kohanim is ba'amida. And one might argue that maybe every bracha should be ba'amida. Now, the truth is that I think it says in Shulchan Aruch that a birchas ha-mitzvah should be ba'amida, but I'm not sure about other brachas like birchas hanenim or birchas shevach v'odoya. Rabbi Nosson Omer in Tzarech, he has a different source from which he derives that birchas kohanim has to be ba'amida, and that is the pasuk says. I'll read the whole pasuk in Dvarim Yud. It says, "Ba'esahi hivdil Hashem eshevet Levi halevi lama lifnei Hashem l'sharso ulevarech bishmo." And this pasuk lends itself to a hekesh to birchas kohanim. And why is that? Because birchas kohanim is called a sherus. Sherus means it's something that's done in the Mikdash. Ma b'shares be'amida, just like all the avodos of the Beis HaMikdash require amida. The Gemara is going to derive that later on. Af mevarech, so to birchas kohanim requires amida. Why? Because the pasuk says l'sharso ulevarech bishmo. So the Gemara says, "Umeshares gufe minolan." How do you know that avodah in the Mikdash requires amida? And then we'll categorize birchas kohanim as a kind of avodah l'sharso, and it likewise requires amida. How do you know that avodah in the Mikdash requires amida? It says, "Kivo bachar Hashem Elokecha Michol shvatecha la'amod l'shares." So la'amod l'shares means that sherus, which is avodah in the Mikdash, requires amida. And now we're subsuming birchas kohanim according to Rabbi Nosson under avodah. That's why, by the way, right after avodah we have birchas kohanim, and he has a note here. He says, "Why do we need a pasuk? After all, it says Lamod lifnei Hashem l'sharso." So the Gemara is quoting a pasuk in Dvarim Yud Ches. There's a pasuk early in Dvarim Yud that says Lamod lifnei Hashem l'sharso. So that's a question. Tanya Yidich, we learned in another brayso. Kosev varchu b'nesius kapayim, that the birchas kohanim requires that the kohanim lift up their arms. Ata omer b'nesius kapayim, o eno ela shalo b'nesius kapayim. Like before, we had a havmina they could do it b'yeshiva. Then we excluded that and we require amida. Now, okay, amida, they're standing, but who says they have to lift up their arms? How do we know this? Minayin. That's the Gemara's question, minayin. And the Gemara in this brisa that we're having is going to derive in Gzeir Shava from Birchas Aaron Cohen Es Ha'am B'Yom Hashmini L'Miluim. At the dedication of the Mishkan, there were 8 days of Miluim, and at the end of those 8 days, the Kohanim, Aaron HaKohen, blessed the people on the 8th day of Miluim. Nemar Khan, in the mitzvah of Birchas Kohen in Parshas Noso, it says Kosev Archu. V'nemar Lahalon, in the brach of Aaron HaKohen, on the 8th day of the Miluim, it says Vayisa Aaron es Yadav Ela'am Vayevarchem. So we have now a Gzeirah Shava of bracha, Kosev Archu, and Vayevarchem, to teach me that just like Aaron in his bracha Vayevarchem, it says Vayisa Aaron es Yadav, is Malahalon, just like in Aaron's bracha b'Nesias Kapayim Afkan, here too in the mitzvah Birchas Kohanim. For all generations, we need a bracha to be b'Nesias Kapayim. So the Gemara says, Kashalei Rabbi Yonasan. This Gzeirah Shava was troubling for Rabbi Yonasan. Very interesting. We don't even have the language of Rabbi Yonasan here. But anyway, the Gemara sort of, in abstentia, is going to quote the Kasha of Rabbi Yonasan. Im alahalan kohen gadol b'rosh chodesh avodas tzibur kan kohen gadol b'rosh chodesh avodas tzibur. So we have the din of the Nesias Kapayim, that the Kohanim have to raise their arms, and we derive that from the bracha of Aaron on the 8th day of the Miluim. So then, perhaps we should go one step further with this Gzeirah Shava, and we should say the following. You know, when Aaron gave that bracha on the 8th day of Miluim, it was on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. The 8th day Miluim coincided with Rosh Chodesh Nisan. So therefore, maybe this halacha that the Kohanim have to lift up their hands during the bracha, maybe that only applies like Aaron, which means the Kohen Gadol, and on Rosh Chodesh, only on Rosh Chodesh. And what was Aaron busy doing? He was involved in the Karbanos Tzibur on Rosh Chodesh. As it says in the Pasuk, Vayvarchem vayered me'asos chato hachatos ve'olav hashlamim. And those were Karbanos Tzibur. So this was Rabbi Yonasan's problem. How do we know that Nesias Kapayim, for the Kohanim to lift up their hands, applies any time that they're mevarech? Maybe it only applies to the Kohen Gadol when he's bringing a carbon tzibur, and it's Rosh Chodesh. And it sounds to me like the Gemara accepted this question of Rabbi Yonasan, because immediately afterwards, the Gemara sort of drops the ball, proverbially, on this Gzeirah Shava. Rabbi Yonasan Omer Eino Tzak, we don't need the Gzeirah Shava. But rather we have a Hekish. Hareu Omer, it says in Dvarim Yudches, Ki vo bachar Hashem Elokecha mikol shvatecha lama l'sharis b'shem Hashem hu ubanav kol hayamim. So it has hu ubanav, which means Aaron and his children. Makish banav lo. The Bnei Aaron are being equated to Aaron in the pasuk hu banav. Mahu, just like in the case of Aaron, when he blessed the people on the 8th day Milum b'Nesis Kaim, he lifted his arms, Af Banav, in their mitzvah Birchas Kohanim, which is the mitzvah Birchas Kohanim L'Doros, they have to be Mevarech b'Nesias Kapayim. You'll say, well, like Rabbi Yonasan was asking earlier, maybe this is only a special din in the Kohen Gadol, but the answer is we have a hekesh between Banav and Aaron. Banav are Kohanim Hedyotos. Uksiv, in the same pasuk, it says Kol Hayomim, which means it's not only a requirement on Rosh Chodesh, Nesias Kapayim, to lift up your hands, applies all the days, whenever they do the Birchas Kohanim, so it's not limited to Rosh Chodesh, and not only that, it's not limited to Avodas HaTzibur, because Avodas HaTzibur applies on very specific days, but here it says Kol Hayomim. Be'iskash bracha l'sherus. So now we're in the pasuk Dvarim Yud, pasuk Ches. It says l'sharso levarich b'shmo, which we had earlier. So even though we only found a hekesh between the Bnei Aaron and Aaron as far as avodas sherus is concerned, and not with regard to Birchas Kohanim, because the pasuk here that we're darshaning ki bo b'char Hashem mikol shvelecha lamod l'shares means the avodas hamigdash. But nevertheless, since it says l'sharso ulevarech b'shmo, we see that we equate brachos with sherus, as we discussed earlier, that Birchas Kohanim is a subset of sherus of avodah. And just like there's an equation between Aaron and Banav, they're shovin b'avodah, so too they're shovin b'bracha. And since Aaron was noseas kappa, when he gave the bracha, he lifted up his arms, so too the Bnei Aaron, for all their days, Kol Hayomim would have to lift up their arms. Tanya Idach, we have another pasuk, another brisa, and now we're dealing with the question of Shema Meforosh. Kosev Varchu es Bnei Yisrael, B'Shema Meforosh. And that means Kiksava. And the assumption here is that here we're talking about the Migdash. The Brisa later on is going to exclude outside the Migdash. But in the Migdash, we need a bracha b'shem mefarash. Hatom b'shem mefarash ain't able b'kinui. Maybe it should be adnus and not shem mefarash. Talmud lomer v'samu es shmi al b'nei Yisrael. And what does the word shmi indicate? Shmi hamiyuchad li. That's the shem hamefarash. Like, for example, the word Adon could be used even lahavdil elf havdolos for a human master of a slave. But when it says the word Shmi, Shmi indicates the Shem HaMiyuchad. Like, for example, in Vayikra Yutes, we have Velosi Shavu B'Shmi Lashaka. And Rashi says that it would seem to indicate in the pasuk that he's chayav only for the Shem HaMiyuchad. But then there's a separate ribui for kinuyim, but if not for the separate ribui, Shmi would indicate Shem HaMiyuchad exclusively. Okay, so the Kohen is being mevarech with the Shem HaMiyuchad, with the Shem HaMefarash. What about our Kohenim? Our Kohenim are not mentioning the Shem HaMefarash. Is Yachal Af B'Gvulin? Okay, should we say that even in the mitzvah of Birchas Kohanim outside the Beis HaMikdash, the Kohanim are required to recite the Shem HaMefarash? And the answer is no. We're going to derive a Gzeres Shava to teach us that this requirement of Shem HaMefarash applies exclusively in the Beis HaMikdash. Nemar Kan. Here it says, V'samu Eshmi. So that's the case of Migdash, where the Kohanim have to recite the name of God, Yud Kei Vav Kei Shem HaMefarash, V'nemar Lahalon, with regard to the Beis HaMikdash in Pashas Re'eh. It says, Ki imel makom asher yivcha Hashem elokechem b'chol shivtechem lasum eshmo sham. Almost identical words. Do you see that? Very striking. The resemblance between Visamu Eshmi and Lasum Es Shmo Sham. So we see that this phrase, Simas Shem, appears with regard to the Mikdash. Makom Asher Yivcha Hashem, Lasum Es Shmo Sham. Malahalon, the Beis HaBechira, that's the place where God shows for Hashras Hashchina, Asher Yivcha Hashem Elokechem, is Afkan here too, is the requirement of Hazkar Shema Meforish in Birkas Kohanim is limited and exclusive to the Beis HaBechira. Rav Yoshia Omer Eino Tzarech. I don't need this Gzeira Shav. But rather, Hareu Omer, it says in Shmos Perek Chav, B'chol Mokom HaMokom Asher Azkir Shmi Avoy Lech V'Articha. Now, what does that mean? B'chol Mokom Salke Daitach? Does it mean anywhere on the face of the earth a person is given license and permitted to be Mazkir Shem HaMeforash? Because again, it says the word Shmi, and Shmi is the Shem HaMiyuchad, the Shem HaMeforash. And yet the Gemara says in Pesachim Adaf Nun, on the pasuk Zeh Shmi Li'olam, V'zeh Zichri L'dar V'dar, La'olam is a Lashon Helen, which means that we should hide the name of God. So even if the name is written Yud K, it's read as Aleph Dal. So what does it mean, B'chol Makom Asher Azkir Shmi, which means it's mutter to mention the name of God, the Shem HaMeforash, and it says B'chol Makom. And furthermore, since the pasuk doesn't designate a specific place for Hazkar Shem, it seemed to imply that wherever we mention the name of God, there'll be Hashras Hashchina. Avoy Lecho Barachticha. Shem, the Shechina is going to come. And is that really possible? That any place on the face of the earth is a Makom Shechina? Ela Mikra Zemisoros. You have to change around the words in the pasuk. V'chol Makom Asher Avoy Lecho Uberachticha. Wherever the Shechina comes and resides, Sham Azkir Shmi, we mention the name of God, the Shem HaMeforash. Vehechan, where is this makom? She'avoy lecha berachticha. The Shechina is there, and you can mention the name of Hashem, the Shem HaMeforash, and the Shechina comes to be Shoreh. Where is that? The Beis HaBechira, in the Old Moed in the Midbar, or in Shiloh, or in Shlomo Melech's Beis HaMikdash B'Yushalayim, in all these places, Sham Azkir Shmi V'hu Beis HaBechira. So hence we derive from this that the mitzvah of Birchas Kohanim in the Shem HaMeforash applies exclusively in the Beis HaMikdash, but not in Gvulin. Tanya Yidach, we have another brisa. In the Parsha Birchas Kohanim, it says, Kosev Archos B'nei Yisrael, Ein li ela B'nei Yisrael, Gerim Noshim Avonim Meshukram Minayin. How do I know that the Birchas Kohanim includes all of Zera Yaakov, including Noshim, Avodim, Gerim, Talmud Lomer, and Mar Lahem Lekulu. There are two extra words in this pasuk, and Mar Lahem, and that's a ribui that comes to include Gerim, Noshim, Avodim. This is a pella, by the way, that there was a, a hamamina that only Zcharim are considered Zera Yaakov and not Noshim. And Noshim would not be included in the bracha of the Kohen. I have a feeling that the Gemara is just interpreting Bnei Yisrael, because very often Bnei Yisrael refers to the Zcharim to the exclusion of the Nekevos. So he just wants to prove from Amar Lahem to knock that thought out of our mind. Tanya Yidich in another brayso called Tivarch. Panim keneged panim. The Kohanim have to face the people who are the misbarchim. Atomer panim keneged panim eina el panim keneged oref. Maybe the Pnei HaKohanim should be keneged oref hakol. What does that mean, oref hakol? It means that the Tzibur doesn't have to face the Kohanim. The Kohanim could be looking at the oref of the kol. So let's say the kol would turn their backs, or maybe they're even outside the Beis HaMedrash, and that's okay. The Kohanim are facing towards the Am, and the Am decide to turn their back on the Kohen. Tamalom Amar Lahem, and again the Gemara is darshaning the extra words Amar Lahem. Ke'adam ha'omer lechaver. When I'm talking to you, we look at each other face to face. Tanya Idach, we learned in another brayso. The pasuk says that the Kohanim have to be mevarech b'kol ram. In other words, it doesn't mean that the Kohanim have to scream and yell, but it means that the tzibur should be able to hear the bracha. But how do you know that? Oh, Eino El Belachash. Maybe Birchas Kohanim is part and parcel of Tefillah, and Tefillah is Belachash. When a person speaks to his friend, hopefully his friend could hear him. And as you get older, that becomes more challenging. You have to really be face to face. We have a Misora b'yodeinu mi'avosenu. It's a minhag mi'rabosenu l'shnayim kore. We're talking about a Beis HaKnesses, and we're talking about Birchas Kohanim. And Abai says that he received a transmission. According to that transmission, you need a minimum of 2 Kohanim. Hooray? What does that mean? And let's say you have 1 Kohen, so he's not going to be mevarech. That's impossible. But the answer is, does the shliach tzibur have to invite the Kohanim by calling upon them to be mevarech? And the answer is, he only has to do so if they're a shnayim. Then the shliach tzibur has to say Kohanim. But Amar Lahem means tell them, the Kohanim, to be mevarech. But ve'ilu li'echad, if the Beis HaKnesses only has 1 Kohen, then the Shliach Tzibur does not have to be Koreh and a Koreh Kohen, and the Kohen will initiate the bracha on his own without being called upon. Shenemar Amar Lahem. The Amar, which is the calling of the Shliach Tzibur out to invite the Kohanim, is only b'lashon lahem, lahem in the plural, l'shnayim. V'yomer Rav Chiznak Tinon Kohen Korei Kohanim v'ein Yisrael Korei Kohanim. Rav Chizda has another transmission which is very foreign to us. And that is, when does the Shliach Tzibur require to invite the Kohanim and give them that clarion call, Kohanim? That's only if the Shliach Tzibur himself is a Kohen. So he calls upon his brothers who are Kohanim, and he insists that they be Mevarech as Klal Yisrael. But if the Shliach Tzibur is not a Kohen, he's only Yisrael, then he doesn't call out to them at all. Very strange. We have to figure out why. But in any event, how does Rav Chisda know this? How does he derive this halacha? Shenemar emar lahem. And it says lahem, amira mishalahem tehe. Mishalahem, that's what it means, lahem. Lahem is shalahem. And this amira of calling on the Kohanim is lahem mishalahem, which means to their brethren who are Kohanim. However, the Gemara concludes that there's only a calling out on the part of the shots when there are two Kohanim, but not on one. But less Hilchos HaKavasi there of Chisda. His drasha of Lehem is not accepted, Mishalahem. And even if the Shliach Tzibur is Yisrael, he will call out and invite the Kohanim to be Mevarech. Okay, then, this is where I think we'll stop for today. Here on Daf Lamed Ches Amud Beis.
Okay.
Okay, then, Ira?
Yeah, thank you very much.
So let me wish you a great week.
Yeah, you too.
Thank you so much.